Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the live in-person and live Zoom worship service of the Unitarian Universalist Church of Riverside. Our opening hymn this morning is number 112, Do You Hear, from the Gray Hymnal. Please feel free to sing as the Spirit moves you, but please keep your masks on. Please stand and embody your spirit and join us in singing hymn number 112, Do You Hear?
Through the sky, through the land, do you hear, in the heights on the plain, in the vale on the plain, in the sun, in the rain, do you hear, through the road, through the rush, through the throng, through the crush, do you hear in the hush of your soul, hear the cry, fear won't still, hear the heart's call to will, hear a sigh, startling trill, in your soul, from the place where you stand to the outermost strand, do you hear, oh my friend, do you hear, all the dreams, all the dares, all the sighs, all the prayers, they are yours, mine and theirs. Do you hear, oh my friend, in the face, in the space, where the sky, through the sky, do you hear, in the heights, on the plain, in the vale, in the sun, in the sun, do you hear?
Thank you for joining us here in person, and thank you for joining us remotely by Zoom, where we will continue live streaming and posting these services on our YouTube channel for our virtual attendees. I'm Grace Preuss, a member of the worship committee, and I will be your worship associate today. Other members of the worship committee you will hear from include Alec Peck, our music coordinator. We welcome you to join us this morning with an open mind and an open heart, and with muted electronic devices, please. We invite you to leave your worries and defenses at the door and trust that what happens in worship is inspiring and powerful. Together, we affirm that this day and our being together can make each of us braver, more compassionate, and wiser as we begin a new day and a new week. Thank you for joining us here, where we will continue live streaming and posting these services on our YouTube channel for our virtual attendees as well. We welcome you, and although our doors are open, the pandemic is not over. So while we are in the sanctuary, please be aware, keep your masks on, and socially distance. Before we move into the service, there are a few announcements we'd like to share. During the service, we will mention several websites, email addresses, and phone numbers. At the end of the service, we will leave up a slide with all of this information, and it is also available on our website. Beginning next Sunday, September 18th, the children at UUCR will be taking collections of staple food items such as peanut butter and canned items for the food insecure in our area. We'll have more information on that shortly. This concludes our announcements. Now I invite all of you to sit back and take a slow, deep breath as we enter into our worship hour. For our call to worship, you are welcome to read with me our covenant. Love is the spirit of this church, and service its law. This is our great covenant, to dwell together in peace, to seek the truth in love, and to help one another. Our sermon today was written by Reverend Peter Friedrichs. Reverend Peter Friedrichs recently retired as a minister of the Unitarian Universalist Church of Delaware County. In his work as the pastor of a religiously liberal and socially progressive church, he was privileged to build and sustain relationships of deep meaning with others of diverse backgrounds and to witness the full range of human experience. These interactions shape and inform his writing, through which he hopes to make sense of the struggles and the successes of our daily living. He is the author of the novel, And the Stars Kept Watch. He lives in Swarthmore, Pennsylvania with his wife and biggest supporter, Irene. They are the proud parents of 2 adult daughters and grandparents of 3 elementary-aged boys. We all know the phrase associated with one of America's most famous symbols, the Statue of Liberty. It reads, "Give me your tired, your poor, your huddled masses yearning to breathe free." This phrase has become part of the collective American consciousness and seemingly invites all to partake in the American dream. How do we reconcile this sentiment with the current climate surrounding our nation's immigration policy? Today, we will listen to a reading that contemplates this very complex issue through a very unique lens. We have 2 lightings of sacred flames. The first is the occupied Indigenous peoples' remembrance candle. The second is the lighting of our own chalice, the symbol of our faith. We walk upon the traditional territories of diverse and sovereign peoples, the original peoples of this land who continue to cry out for justice and self-determination. This spot we occupy was first the sacred space of several groups of Indigenous peoples, including the Cahuilla, the Cupeño, and the Serrano. We, the Universalist Unitarian Church of Riverside, light this sacred flame as the stewards of this sacred and holy place. We are blessed with a space and opportunity to strive to live out our common principles, to bring justice, equity, and compassion into our daily lives, to resist all that threatens the earth and her people, and to be part of a world community with peace, liberty, and justice for all. Let these thoughts carry us forth as we journey and worship together. Today's reading of the chalice lighting is by David Breeden. We light this chalice, remembering and honoring our own tradition and celebrating the rich diversity of traditions among us. As we search for justice, meaning, and purpose, may we remember that justice, meaning, and purpose live first in deeply listening to one another. Thank you, Bill. Now we enter the portion of the service greeting our guests. We have a tradition at UUCR to welcome those who are visitors or perhaps returning after some time away. We know it can be uncomfortable to stand up and speak in front of others, and so now I will ask for a volunteer from someone who has been here a while to tell us your name and how you found out about our church. We ask you to step close to the mic in the front and speak directly and clearly so that everyone can hear. Do we have any volunteers today? Alec? Thank you, Alec.
Hi, morning, everybody. I came here, my name is Alec, and I found out about the church when I moved here and I went searching for local UU churches in the area, and this was the result. And I thought the website looked awesome and really well put together. And so I was really surprised when I found such a small community here, really overrepresenting yourselves here, which I thought was great. And I've been really happy since I came here. Thank you.
Thank you, Alec. We're glad you're here. And that's how it's done. So if you are new here, a visitor or an old friend, please raise your hand and stand up and come to the mic in front of the pulpit. Do we have any takers? Welcome.
Hi, I'm Dominic, and I'm here because the Unitarian Universalist ideals have appealed to me for a long time. I just haven't attended any services yet, and here I am today. I just wanted to say thank you for having me.
Thank you. Thank you for that. If there's someone online who would like to introduce themselves, please raise your hand and we will call on you by Zoom. Please let us know who you are, where you are from, and how you found out about us. For any other new guests, please join us for socializing and coffee hour after the service. We'd love to chat with you out in the parish hall, where you will also find our visitors book. Please leave your name and your contact information if you would like to know about upcoming events. For those online, the best way to get added to the mailing list is to email the church office at admin@uuchurchofriverside.org. Our hymn now is Sing the World That God Imagines. Words by Amanda Udis Kessler and music by Ludwig van Beethoven. Please feel free to sing as the spirit moves you, but please with your mask on. Please stand and body your spirit and join us in singing Sing the World That God Imagines. The words will be projected on the wall.
Sing the world that God imagines. Sing of justice, joy, and peace. Sing of welcome offered freely. Sing of love's unending feast. What we sing can call us onward. What we sing can make demands. As we sing, we live God's future, heart and soul and mind and hands. Sing the world that God imagines. Sing of all the hungry fed. Sing the freeing of the captives. Sing of wine and sing of bread. What we sing can stir our spirits. What we sing can help us care. Sing the holy invitation. Sing of wonder everywhere. Build the world that God imagines. Birth a day of hope restored. Gather in the lost and lonely. Heal the sick and tend the poor. Ours the work of co-creation. Ours the season to rejoice. Join in love's imagination. Take your place and raise your voice. 'Tis the world that God imagines. Sing of justice, joy, and peace. Sing of freeing of the captives. Sing of wine and sing of bread. What we sing can stir our spirits. What we sing can help us care. Sing the holy invitation. Sing of wonder everywhere. Build the world that God imagines. Birth a day of hope restored. Gather in the lost and lonely. Heal the sick and tend the poor. Ours the work of co-creation. Ours the season to rejoice. Join in love's imagination. Take your place and raise your voice.
Now we have sharing our stewardship. This portion of our service is to support our beloved historical church. This can be accomplished in several ways. In addition to the weekly collection, you may send your checks to the church address, which is shown here. You may contribute by PayPal using the QR code, which is on the church website as well as in the newsletter. Stater Brothers Market gives our church a rebate on Stater's grocery cards, which we will have in church each Sunday. You get the full value and the church also receives a percentage. Please donate as the Spirit moves you by whatever method works best for you. Thank you for your generosity, and to those who give of their time and their talent, thank you for your generous care and attention. Will our ushers now please come forward to receive the collection? Our next hymn is number 402, From You I Receive, from the Gray Hymnal. Please feel free to sing as the Spirit moves you, but with your masks on. Please stand in body or in spirit and join us in singing hymn number 402, From You I Receive.
From you I receive, to you I give. Together we share, from this we live. From you I receive, to you I give. Together we share, from this we live. From you I receive.
Our meditation today is We Are Not Guests by Alicia R. Ford. Am I a guest here in this house? Are you? Are we guests here in this house? And whose house do we inhabit? In the small world of our lives, the borders between us, easements, fences, gates, and hedges serve to delineate, to separate us, to remind us of where my property begins and ends, where your property begins and ends. If you cross over, you are a trespasser or a guest in my house. You've worked to own this small plot of land and the house erected on it. You've claimed it. It is now part of yourself, your definition of self, your identity. If I cross over your fences, I am a trespasser or a guest in your house. What does it mean then that in 1845, the United States crossed over into Mexico and took half of that country, took land, resources, and labor? Was a US trespasser or guest? Are there to be no consequences for taking what does not belong to you? Should we simply forget whose house we inhabit? To speak of hospitality in immigration often erases historical context, the actions of the past that have led us step by step into this current predicament. Professor Miguel de la Torre writes, perhaps it might be more accurate to speak of the responsibility of restitution rather than the virtue of hospitality. Hospitality in this case implies that the house belongs to us, that the land, the resources that are part of this house is ours, and we who now live here are being virtuous in our willingness to share. It erases the history that would have us remember that those who cross the border today, those choosing to brave the harsh conditions of the desert, those who face the possibility of death, imprisonment, deportation, and criminalization are doing so because the US once crossed their borders to extract their resources and labor. It is for them a matter of survival. It is for the US a matter of restitution. The prospect of restitution is scary. Where do we begin? With Mexico? With Native Americans? With territories? With the descendants of those who were enslaved? How do we acknowledge and address the complexities of our history, present, and if we are not conscious, future of dominance? What would right relationship look like? What conditions and considerations would make restitution possible? And for us, Unitarian Universalists, what would it mean for us to shake off the idea of hospitality as a central principle that is often attached to immigration and delve into the concept of restitution? Whose house do we inhabit? For we are not hosts, we are not owners, nor are we guests. What then is our responsibility? Now let us pause for a moment of silence. Now I would like to introduce Linda Van Voorhis, sharing with us the reading entitled In Praise of Weeds by Peter Friedrichs.
Thank you, Grace. Good morning. In praise of weeds, pity the poor dandelion. It is, in many ways, the perfect plant. With a taproot that grows more than a foot long, it can survive in climates of scorching heat and bitter cold. Its tender young greens make a tasty addition to any salad, or they can be boiled like fiddleheads or as a tea infusion. The dandelion leaves contain more beta carotene than carrots and more iron than spinach. Its blossoms, when properly fermented, perhaps with a bit of orange or lemon, make a sweet white wine. That taproot contains medicinal properties and can be beneficial to both the liver and the kidneys as both a diuretic and a blood cleanser. It can also be dried, roasted, and ground as a coffee substitute. The flower's white milky sap can be used to alleviate bee stings and to remove calluses and moles. And then there is the dandelion's ingenious method of reproduction. That beautiful yellow bloom is actually a composite of hundreds of tiny blossoms that mature into familiar white globes of seeds. Unlike most other seeds, dandelion seeds can germinate without a period of dormancy, and the plant is self-pollinating. Each plant contains hundreds of parachute-like seeds that, to the delight of toddlers everywhere who pluck and blow them apart, can be carried effortlessly on the wind for miles and miles. Yes, the dandelion is perhaps nature's perfect plant. Yet plunk a dandelion down in the middle of a manicured mainline lawn, and it is treated like a terrorist. Armies of lawn care professionals are dispatched with chemicals, biological weapons of mass discussion in order to eradicate this menace. It is, after all, a weed. Americans spend more than $1 billion each year on more than 1 million pounds of herbicides, pesticides, and other lawn care chemicals in their attempts to rid their yards of these and other pesky plants. Let us take a look at another insidious invader. Several years ago, as I was making my twice weekly drive between Boston and Portland, I noticed a beautiful flower blooming along the wet, marshy swells beside the highway. It was tall and feathery with brilliant purple blossoms. This flower, the purple loosestrife, was a source of beauty and joy for me as I traveled the well-worn roads day in and day out. How the loosestrife made it to American shores from its native European shores is uncertain, although some speculate that it was a secret stowaway in the sand and soil that some early immigrant ships used for ballast and then dumped overboard upon their arrival in the New World. It was also valued in Europe for its medicinal properties, and it was likely brought over intentionally as well. By the early 1800s, loosestrife was so abundant in the wetlands and along the shores of New England that some botanists listed it as a native species. Gardeners on both sides of the Atlantic have cultivated loosestrife for centuries, for its beauty as a border planting, for its homeopathic properties, and for its support of the honeybee population. The purple loosestrife, like the dandelion, is a miracle of nature. It enjoys an extended flowering season from early June through September, and a mature plant may contain as many as 30 flowering stems that will produce between 2 and 3 million seeds each year. But despite its beauty and utility, the purple loosestrife is like a common criminal named the most wanted on the list of invasive plants of many of state governments. It is a weed of the worst variety, an alien invader of our nation's wetlands that threatens to choke out the natural diversity that supports wildlife and indigenous species of flora and fauna. I will ask you to indulge with me as I describe to you one more plant that I find fascinating, the Pachysandra terminalis. It is a plant that I grew up with in New York, but that doesn't flourish in Maine, where I spent the last 23 years. Upon my arrival in Pennsylvania, the common Pachysandra greeted me like a long-lost friend. In the heavily wooded borough of Swarthmore, it is the perfect ground cover plant, where great carpets spread across shady lots. One gardening website refers to Pachysandra as America's favorite ground cover, second only to asphalt. Pachysandra is an import from Asia that thrives in moist, shady areas, spreading slowly through creeping shoots. It is strictly an ornamental plant with no known medicinal or nutritious qualities. As I was weeding a bed of Pachysandra early this summer, pulling vines and plants of suspicious origin that were poking their heads up from the ground cover, there occurred to me a certain irony. Here I was, weeding among a bed of what is essentially another weed. What then makes a weed? Is it a weed just because we call it that? Ralph Waldo Emerson, St. Ralph to we Universalist Unitarians, once said that a weed is simply a plant whose virtues we have not yet discovered. But I don't think that's quite right. Long ago, we discovered the virtues of the dandelion and the loosestrife, yet they are a public menace. And the Pachysandra, with no particular virtue other than its persistence in growing low and in shady places areas, is spared this label. In his book, Second Nature, author and gardener Michael Pollan describes the strict hierarchy as plants, where the top species are occupied by what he calls the hyper-civilized hybrids, like roses. And the bottom tier is infested with weeds, which he calls the plant world's proletariat, furiously reproducing and threatening to usurp the position of their more refined horticultural betters. Weediness, he tells me, is determined by several factors, including how highly hybridized a plant is. The more refined and cultured, the better. The ease of difficulty of growing. The hardy and easily adapted larkspur is more weedy than, say, a fragile, delicate orchard. And finally, its color. White, of course, is at the top. Pollan goes on to tell us there are two primary schools of thought when it comes to weeds. The first holds that a weed is any plant in the wrong place. And the other defines a weed to be any aggressive plant that competes successfully against cultivated plants. The metaphysical problem of weeds, he writes, is not unlike the metaphysical problem of evil. It is an abiding property of the universe or an invention of humanity. The purple loosestrife that I enjoyed driving up and down Route 95 for years, to my eye was a joy. But then my friend told me it was a terribly offensive weed, and my perception of the plant was forever changed. Was the loosestrife a weed before we made it so? Any gardener will tell you that your vegetable crop will be stifled and eventually overcome if you don't dispose of the plants you didn't plant there. Sedge and kudzu and bamboo will invariably crowd out tomatoes and peas and beans, just as loosestrife has overtaken the cattails of New England marshes. No matter how we equate weeds with a wilderness and nature, whether we are backyard gardeners or farmers of the Great Plains, as cultivators of the land, we are called to discriminate between the plants we want and those we don't. We make these value judgments when we plant Pachysandra and pull up pigweed. As Michael Pollan writes, weeding is a process by which we make informed choices in nature, discriminate between the good and the bad, apply our intelligence and sweat to the earth. And so, depending on our intended outcome, the picture of the world that we wish to create, we may praise or curse the plants that erupt from the soil beneath our feet. When I offered up the topic of this morning's sermon last June, I had in mind a lighthearted look at weeds, at the lengths we go to get rid of them, and how weeds are what we make of them. As I've considered and encountered weeds over the weeks since, I have, however, become increasingly troubled and uneasy. For as the crops of our country's farmlands have ripened and in some cases shriveled on the vine, I hear the language of the weeds being used in our nation's debates about the problem, quote unquote, of the illegal immigration. Like so much loose strife, illegal aliens from Mexico, Central and South America and Asia are flooding our endemic homeland, straining our public resources, crowding our cities, and taking our jobs. We, the precious flowers of our highly hybridized civilization, are under siege from these uncultured invaders. Aliens, we call them, illegals. Labels like the term weed implies that they are a scourge, a menace to be eradicated. The Bush administration recently announced a crackdown on people living in the United States illegally, as well as the companies that employ them. Let me say at the onset that I am in favor of controlling our borders and stemming the flow of people entering our country through illicit means. As a nation, we have a right to protect ourselves from terrorists and criminals and others who may wish us harm. But the American dream is an attractive one to many living in poverty just across our borders. The dream of a steady job, of being able to feed your family, of educating your children, of living in a decent home without fear of being the victim of violent crime. For all its problems and all its limitations, our society has achieved a standard of living unmatched in human history, and many who see it from afar long to share our bounty. And as every one of us here is a child of immigrants, parents, grandparents, great-grandparents who wanted to share in this dream, so are those today unborn children whose parents long to provide them what ours provided to us. Many of those parents are risking their lives to get it, crossing the ocean in shipping containers and crossing our southern borders in 18-wheelers, hiking for miles across dangerous deserts and blazing heat and chilling cold, floating across the Caribbean Sea on rafts made of old tires and plastic sheeting. When we label these people, these mothers and fathers and grandparents and children, as illegal aliens, we are dehumanizing them. And once they are dehumanized, it is easy to talk about them as things, as problems, as so much kudzu to beat back at the border, lest our garden be overtaken and all we have cultivated destroyed. Never mind that our apple crops are rotting on the trees and our grapes are wilting on the vines this summer because farmers can't find workers to bring in their crops. What has been lost in the debate over immigration situation is the fact that each of the individuals who live in our country illegally is a human being, a person with a family and a story, just like us. We couch the debate in terms of us and them, when in fact, there is no them, there is only us. And as every religion the world has ever known has told us, do unto others as you would have done unto you. Or in this case, as you have had done unto your parents or grandparents or great-grandparents when they arrived on these shores. In an effort to bring a human face to the so-called immigration problem, let me tell you the story of George. George is not his real name, but he is a real person. He is a carpenter, a term that doesn't accurately reflect his talent. He is an artist with wood. He builds cabinetry and moldings and other finished woodwork for fancy homes of business executives and governmental officials. George has lived in the United States for 14 years, having made a treacherous passage from Mexico on foot through the desert of Arizona. George has a 7-year-old son who was born in this country and is therefore a US citizen. With a false driver's license and social security number, George rents an apartment, owns a car, works. He even pays taxes to the government that is in constant pursuit of him. George lives in fear daily. As he drives from his apartment to the job site, he worries that he'll be stopped for a minor traffic infraction or simply because of his brown skin. That a California state trooper will discover that his license is fake. He knows that if this happens, he will be handcuffed and thrown into jail, and within a few short weeks, he will be sent back to Mexico, where he has no family, no job, and no hope, and his son will grow up fatherless. Ask George why he doesn't try to legalize his status here, and he will tell you to do that under the current law would mean voluntarily returning to Mexico, submitting an application to the Immigration and Naturalization Service for a fee, of course, and waiting somewhere in the neighborhood of 6 to 7 years for a decision, which could, of course, be a rejection. Our politicians, particularly the conservative ones, are afraid of the word amnesty because they don't want to appear to be soft on crime. They also fear granting amnesty to those in our country illegally will open the floodgates to more illegal immigrants. I believe that we need a two-pronged approach that considers and treats as human beings with respect that they are due, those who wish to stay here or those who wish to come here and work. First, it is high time to welcome the Georges of our society into our garden as full partners in the American dream. Amnesty for those who have lived and worked diligently within our borders for 15, 10, or even 5 years, who have abided by our laws and want nothing more than to share in this nation's bounty, and to add to it, is long overdue. Amnesty is not a reward for their legal entry, but an acknowledgement of their industriousness and honesty. Second, we must revise our immigration policies to make it easier for U.S. companies to employ foreign workers. We should provide them with incentives to legally invite guest workers here rather than to charge them exorbitant fees and to threaten them with fines for non-compliance. We should encourage legal seasonal employment of people from overseas and thereby discourage illegal entry. Legal entry into our country, properly monitored, followed by a return to the worker's home country at the end of his or her term, will enable those living in poverty overseas to support themselves and their families while discouraging illegal entry at the risk of deportation. Offer the choice of legal seasonal employment or long-term illegal status. Most foreign workers will choose the legal route. There are countless Georges in this country right now, likely millions. Men and women who, although they have entered the country illegally, have been and continue to be protective members of our society. They may not be highly hybridized flowers in the top tiers of the garden's hierarchy, though some of them could be, I'm sure, given the chance. But nor are they weeds to be uprooted and eradicated from the rich soil of this nation. Like a rototiller run amok, this nation's immigration policy fails to discriminate between the flowers that bloom and the dangerous, insidious actors. In describing the process by which we cultivate our garden, Michael Pollan tells us that weeding is the process by which we make informed choices in nature, discriminate between the good and the bad, apply our intelligence and sweat to the earth. We owe at least this same level of care, discrimination, and intelligence to the human beings who sit at the heart of the immigration debate. And I would like to add, in reflection on reading this, that there are other perceived weeds in our nation's gardens. People who just want to live their lives choosing their own sexuality. There are women who want to make their choice how they live their lives and are fast becoming more and more less able to do that. There are people of different colors who are considered weeds just because of the color of their skin. So I think that in considering what Peter Friedrich has to say here, there is a very much wider perspective of how we look at the weeds in our garden. Thank you.
Thank you, Linda. Just in the interest of the sermon, how many gardeners do we have out there in the audience? Okay. So we'd like your perspective on weeds and flowers. Okay. So our closing hymn now is Holy Now by Peter Mayer. The words will be projected on the wall. Please feel free to sing as the Spirit moves you, but please with your masks on.
When I was a boy, each week on Sunday we would go to church and pay attention to the priest, that he would read the holy word and consecrate the holy bread, and everyone would kneel and bow. Today the only difference is everything is holy now. Everything is holy now. And when I was in Sunday school, we would learn about the time Moses split the sea in two, and Jesus made the water wine. And I remember feeling sad, miracles don't happen still. Now I can't keep track, 'cause everything's a miracle. Everything's a miracle. Wine from water is not so small, but an even better magic trick is that anything is here at all. So the challenging thing becomes not to look for miracles, but finding where there isn't one. When holy water was rare at best, it barely wet my fingertips, but now I have to hold my breath like I'm swimming in a sea of it. It used to be a world half there, heaven's second-rate hand-me-down, but I walk it with a reverent air, 'cause everything is holy now. Child's face, say it's not a testament, that'd be very hard to say. See another new morning come, say it's not a sacrament, I tell you that it can't be done. This morning outside I stood, I saw a little red-winged bird shining like a burning bush and singing like a scripture verse. It made me want to bow my head. I remember when church let out how things have changed since then. Everything is holy now. It used to be a world half there, heaven's second-rate hand-me-down. But I walk it with a reverent air, 'cause everything is holy now.
May the light around us guide our footsteps and hold us fast to the best and most righteous that we seek. May the darkness around us nurture our dreams and give us rest so that we may give ourselves to the work of our world. Let us seek to remember the wholeness of our lives, the weaving of light and shadow in this great and astonishing dance in which we move. Namaste, amen, and blessed be. Thank you, Linda, for sharing your valuable time and the reading with us this morning. It is sincerely appreciated, and we look forward to seeing you again. Before we end, I'd like to announce that we will be having our water communion on the last week of September, which is 2 weeks from now, on September 25th. So we'd just like to announce that to you right now in advance, and we'll have more information on that next week for you, okay? Thank you so much. All right. If there are those of you who would like to stay in the sanctuary for 10 to 5 minutes for questions or to share discussion or observations from the service, please remain in the sanctuary or online. Please be aware that these comments will be posted online. For the rest of you, you are now welcome to adjourn into the parish hall.
Thank you, Linda, for sharing that for us. And I thought that was really great to listen to. And I've for a long time described weeds as being, as I think you mentioned, as being a plant that you don't want to have growing. And I didn't realize that this was sort of a contentious viewpoint, but apparently a lot of people don't like it when I describe weeds in this way. But I think it's fairly accurate. But of course, there is that conflation between the group of plants that you just simply are choosing not to grow and the group of plants which you're keeping out because they're actively harmful to the environment, usually because they're invasive and they don't belong in that original environment. And I thought it was really poignant to point out that this is sort of the same school of thought that social Darwinists apply to humans in looking at how do we form the in-groups of who are the right people and who are the wrong people. And we conflate that with, and those people who would like to do that, conflate that out-group, that the people that they simply don't like, with those people who are actively harmful to society. And they like to picture making a perfect society the way that you might try to tend a tomato plant in an environment where it's surrounded by plants that will outcompete it. But of course, in reality, the right way to build a society is not the same way that you build a garden, because we're not plants. And in reality, but there are of course some parallels, and in reality, a well-sustained garden requires a variety of plants, and we've seen the Dust Bowl in America was formed because we weren't cycling out crops, and we were trying to just specialize in just one type of crop, and that ruined the soil. And so I thought that was really a really great parallel that was drawn there. Thank you.
Thank you, Alec. Bill? Good morning.
Hello,
Hello.
I'm the mask lady, Diane. I want to thank you for putting the music in, and the words always make me cry, inspired crying, because it gives me tremendous hope to carry on and think about things in a little more universal way, because we can get very structured in thinking about our own little garden, whatever ideas might be in our own little garden, but the weed thing right now, I don't get out much, but when I went out this morning, heading here a bit late to your service, I looked out at an area where I have not been able to put water. And I saw something really rather amazing, that one day of rain, that beautiful gift from above, down came that wonderful thing from the sky called water, rain. And I saw in my front yard area where I haven't been watering, because I'm trying to protect the water that we do have, the plants, every plant, the weeds included, just in that period of time with sunshine afterwards, were all together growing up out of the ground, which was thirsty and dry. Maybe if we can water and share everything that comes to us, the way that water was a gift to that yard this morning, it won't matter so much if we have a dandelion here and there, because my goodness, I've learned more about how wonderful dandelions are. And I guess the same thing might happen in general, as you were speaking about our society. When we realize we're all in it together and we can flourish better when we absorb the water together of good ideas and good deeds, it sure can make a difference. And maybe tomorrow will be a bit better for what we do today and how grateful we are when the water comes. Enough of me. Bye.
Thank you for sharing. Bill?
Two things. First one was this is a story I'd heard at one point. The only question is the word. I'm going to have to essentially make up the word. But in the Wesleyan Bible Society makes a point of being, they're pretty dedicated missionaries, though they've gone around the world. And this one guy was in Indonesia, or he was in the Philippines. And he was there with one of the locals, and he says, I have to learn the new words of the plants around me. I'm going to be here for a while. Thank you so much for giving me a tour of some of the stuff that grows around here. And he would go on, and I'm going to make up some of the words, but the idea behind, I believe you'll catch. This is Friedrichs. It makes a decent tea, but you're going to want some lemon juice with it. This is Mabnol and is good for stomach problems. And this is Kresach. And he pointed at a plant that had yellow stubby little roots to it. And then he named some more plants. And this is Kresach. And this time the plant was spindly and kind of spiky. Did not even look like the other. And then again, this is Kresach. You just use the same word for three different plants. What's this about? Why do you call that Kresach? Oh, in our language, Kresach means the rest of this stuff. If we have a name for it, if we have a use for it, it gets a name. If not, use Kresach. So that was, right away had the idea of utility being tied into it. The other one goes right to my Irish last name. We had a monoculture at one point in Ireland for the potatoes. And it meant that when the blight hit it, it fricking got everything. And starvation and sorrowful times, boy, bad times. Started the whole rush of the Irish all across the world. And the idea of when you're working for a living with no break, you really don't want a plant that eats or a thing that eats the stuff you're trying to grow. But boy, a monoculture doesn't necessarily do anyone any favors either. Here's to diversity in whatever form.
Thank you, Bill. Adam.
Yeah, I really appreciated that sermon. I liked it. But I thought it was interesting, the sort of bringing, like talking about immigration and weeds. Because I think about when I think about people as plants and think about when we talk about weeds, we're talking about like invasive species that have come here and kind of destroyed the biodiversity. And if I think about people like that, really people from Mexico aren't necessarily in California, aren't necessarily immigrants, right? A lot of them, like they'll say, you know, we didn't cross the border crossed us, right? This was Mexico. When I think about people as plants and an invasive species coming over here and destroying the biodiversity and that kind of thing, I think of people who look a lot more like me than necessarily, you know, immigrants from Southern countries, first of all. And then another thing I was just thinking as you were reading, Linda, they said something about conservative politicians being afraid of amnesty because they're afraid of being seen as soft on crime. And I think since January 6th, we've seen that conservative politicians are okay being seen soft on crime. I think that their issue with amnesty is just racism.
Thank you, Adam. Walt.
Well, in reference to the drivers of immigration, the question is, will we allow Lula to rule freely, or will our CIA overthrow him shortly after he is elected? Thank you.
I think it's a sobering thought to think that America is actually a land made of immigrants. I don't know where that puts us in the discussion. Go ahead, Alec.
I wanted to mention a couple things. Thank you, Adam, for pointing that out. I definitely think there's some projection going on there, thinking about the potential groups of people who might come in and try to wipe out the local populations, just a little bit maybe. But I also think about I'm often sort of jealous in a way of sort of the people who lived in a time when mankind was mostly hunter-gatherers, because I think about all of the stuff that's in my head, like every calculus integral that I've memorized could have been the name of a plant. And I could have memorized, and that because that's what our brains evolved to do, is to intensely categorize and catalog every single thing that we find and come across in nature, and to understand and be able to put together what can I do with this plant, and to be able to have such an intimate relationship with and have an intimate understanding of the web of life, I think I'm jealous of that, because we have so much other stuff that we have to think about in that we live in a modern society, like how to operate a car, when we were never evolved to learn how to operate cars. We were meant to learn about plants and you know, what does each animal's footprint look like, and it's maybe just a fantasy of having a really intimate knowledge of just one specific topic. But wouldn't it be beautiful to have that level of intimate knowledge about every single other thing that has grown with us on this planet?
I like that idea too, because it allows us to really recognize that we are in partnership with this planet. We are not, it is just not people. And then that also applies again, you get back to different species of weeds, you know. The weeds are also people, and if we could live in harmony with all of nature, including the people who are part of that, then you would have a lovely garden, wouldn't you? And beyond that, when I think about this, and I think about the political in the arena today, where you have so much separation of who's the weeds and who's the good guy, and you look back even to this country today, actually the invader weeds were the white people who came in and took over from the people, the native sons of this land. And so the actual process goes way farther back, and it's kind of interesting how that all gets forgotten today in the picture of who's weeds and who isn't. So.
Any other comments? Nope. Okay. Thank you all for your thoughts, and we are now adjourned. Thank you for coming. Thank you, Linda.